Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to Toe Tags Metal Reviews, and today we're giving you guys a review of Cycles of Pain by Angra. So we've been listening to this album non-stop for an entire week, and I gotta say, I enjoyed it. I think this is a fun album, and I think overall, this is a fun band. I think this band easily allows for a listener to enjoy what's being presented just from the energy they have. The vocal performance is always fun, and the depth that's in the music, the stuff they incorporate, and that they're progressive in nature. Lots of fun, and there are a few songs that really stood out to me. Ride Into the Storm, which was the first single that we checked out and reacted to, still a really great song. I feel like it's just, it's such a great start to the album. With the energy of it, it's like, yeah, this is sick. Like, you feel that power.
Yep.
Power metal for a reason.
Got it.
Vida Seca, which is like in the middle of the album, I think it's a great midpoint. Like, it's really good at bringing some of the energy down, but still being interesting. It's got all the auxiliary percussion in it and stuff. The guest vocal, really nice, and then the band comes in. It's a song that stood out when I would hear it. Faithless Sanctuary is also the other highest point for me, which happens a few tracks later. And I described it last week as prime Bruce Dickinson singing a Dream Theater song. And I'm thinking like late 90s Dream Theater. Like, this is something I feel like you'd hear maybe on like Falling Into Infinity or something. You know, like around that era. So I thought that was really cool and really interesting. And another thing I was finding about this album I was enjoying is that stuff is catchy. The hooks and the melodies really get into your head, so you're kind of singing along or humming along, you know, regardless of how you think of the song for most of it. And other tracks that I was enjoying were like Dead Man on Display was a fun one. Gods of the World was pretty good. Tide of Changes, I actually really liked part one. Even though it's just kind of like the intro to it, it's really pretty sounding, and I like that a lot. And Tears of Blood, I know you weren't huge on that song when we checked it out in our first impressions of this album. I think Tears of Blood is a really good closer. I think the operatic nature of it is cool and interesting, and I like that they took it in that direction. And it's like, okay, they got this cool, grandiose kind of ending to the album that doesn't really sound like anything else on the record.
It doesn't.
It's got its own personality to it, which I do think is pretty good. That being said, I found that there were a few lull moments on this album. Cyclist Dolores, it's funny because we talked about this before where, you know, an effective interlude or an effective intro is one that's not too long, and this is under a minute.
Yeah.
But I got to a point where when I started the album, I would just start with Ride Into the Storm, and that's for two reasons. One, I don't feel like this song really built up to it very well. It didn't really get me excited for like, oh, here we go. It's like, let me just start with like the action.
Like, it doesn't serve the purpose it's meant to serve.
It doesn't really feel like it effectively serves that purpose, but on top of that, I feel like this might be either an editing issue or a Spotify issue, but it doesn't flow into it. It kind of like cuts at the end, and obviously it's supposed to flow into Ride Into the Storm, so it's like, why even, like, whatever. I would just essentially be skipping it every single time.
Yeah.
The title track is a song that like came and went. Even though it's like, it's kind of like the ballad of the album, that kind of like bring the energy level down near the end and then, you know, bring it back up. But I don't know, it just came and went. I'm just like, yeah, there it is. And there wasn't really too much out of that. And I guess just the other songs that I didn't mention were ones that were like there. Wasn't really anything super duper notable, but there are a few moments that stood out. I mean, I mentioned this last week. The little drum fill before the second solo, Dead Man on Display, still awesome. Every time I heard that, like, yeah, that was a sick fill. The bridge in Faithless Sanctuary, you get a little bit of aggression in the vocals, which is pretty cool. And I like that quite a bit. So, what are your thoughts on the album?
I have a lot of thoughts on the album. Okay.
I know you weren't really huge on it when
I wasn't huge on it, and my thought was I had my fingers crossed, hoping this was going to be an Omni situation where I didn't like it at first, but I loved it by the end. I'll just kind of say off the bat, this didn't have that effect on me. I'm just trying to figure out where to start here. So I think I'm going to start with the biggest hang-up that I had, and that's that this reminded me too much of Iron Maiden through the week. And I've always thought that this band has Iron Maiden-esque elements, but I've never really thought they sound like Iron Maiden. I felt like this sounded way too much like Iron Maiden in a lot of ways, but not even good Iron Maiden. It's like the Iron Maiden that I'm not really a fan of. So it was rubbing me wrong the whole week in that sense. And the thing that kind of amplified that for me is I was at work last week, and I was working on a project with my coworker, and I had this on, and he kept saying it sounded like Iron Maiden. Like, he kept saying it over and over again. Like, are you sure this isn't Iron Maiden? This sounds like Iron Maiden. This sounds like... And I'm like, man, like, I already thought that, and this guy's just reinforcing my opinion, right? So that was bugging me. Like, I didn't feel that way with Omni. I felt like, yeah, this singer sounds like Bruce Dickinson sometimes, but on here it's like it's a lot, and that was bothering me. With that said, and that out of the way, I wasn't finding a lot of things on this album that I was really enjoying that much, and that's a shame because we really loved the singles. And then even on the first impressions last week, I listened to the singles again and went, how come I don't like these as much as, like, when I first heard them? I was like, whoa, this is amazing. I'm so hyped for this. I think there's two songs on this album that I would say are still enjoyable for me. Tide of Changes Part 2, because you mentioned this album being catchy. To me, this is the only song that's catchy, and it's the chorus. And I like it. It's good catchy. And I can get behind it. I think that's a great song. And the second one is Faithless Sanctuary, which on the first impressions I said was my highlight. You just said it was one of your highlights. I think the consensus is in. It's one of the best songs on this album. I also agree with TV Fish's thing that it sounds like Bruce Dickinson singing over a Dream Theater song. That sounds exactly like what this is, right? But yeah, great song. It's got some cool stuff. Mentioned in the last video in the first impressions, so I don't need to go over it again. Then you have songs like Cyclist Dolores, which for you was a skip. It was a skip for me as well. Tide of Changes Part 1, I skipped that every time. Cycles of Pain, the ballad, I started skipping that as well. It got to the point where I was just like, I don't want to listen to this, skip. And Tears of Blood, your opinion's valid, whatever. I think this is an awful song. I think it's terrible. And there's two guest vocalists on it. Now, the vocal talent is great. The way it's executed is cringy. I do not like it. I think it sounds really bad. That's just my opinion. There's probably a lot of people that are gonna hate on me for that. That's what it is. I had to skip this song. It was bugging me every time it was on. So basically, after Generation Warriors, I went skip to get back to Ride Into the Storm, right? Ride Into the Storm, by the way, is a good opening track, right? So there's some stuff there that's okay.
And we felt that way since we even reacted to it. We said this would be a great opener.
Exactly. We didn't even know it was the opener at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think another thing that has the good thing that this album has going for it is the solos, right? So even in songs that are not great, like Cycles of Pain, for example, I don't like the song, but it's got a good solo in it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Guess you picked up on that quick before you started skipping it.
Yeah, but even still, like, it wasn't something that saved the song for me. Yeah. Like, I'll listen to it sometimes, but then I'm like, it's not really that worth it. So skip. I like Dead Men on Display. So you said drum fill. To me, it was almost a mini drum solo. It breaks up two guitar solos too. So you got a guitar solo, then you have this like drum fill / solo, whatever you want to identify it as.
It's like 2 bars.
Yeah.
So like whether you consider that like a long fill or a small solo.
A long fill or mini solo,
whatever.
Yeah. One or the other.
It sounded good. That's what's important.
Yeah, but I just like the fact that it's where it's placed is interesting because you have a solo, then you have that drum part, and then you have another solo after it.
Yeah.
So it kind of breaks up the solo, and I don't know if it's like 2 different people soloing. I don't really know the band and how many guitar players they have and stuff like that. So maybe it's the same guy. Either way, whatever. Really cool part, right? I like that. That's really cool. Yeah, my feelings for this was just like I wish it sounded more like Omni, and I did go and listen to Omni again this week, and like I said last week, that album holds up. It still slays. I feel like it's all around better, more aggressive, more diverse, and importantly for me, less Iron Maiden sounding. So I guess needless to say, I didn't have a great week with this album, and that doesn't feel good to say. I like, coming with positivity here, but I gotta be honest with my feelings. So
that's what we're all about.
That's what we're all about. So yeah, I think I'm ready to rate it. If you are.
Yeah, I guess I'll go first.
Sure.
This is a good album, and I've been saying that throughout this entire review. However, I found myself throughout the week getting bored of this album. I felt like there were 3 songs that really, really stood out the most, and those were the 3 I mentioned: Ride Into the Storm, Vita Seca, and Faithless Sanctuary. Those ones were really the ones I gravitated towards, but everything else was like good. However, this album to me felt like it was missing that special spark to make it an elite level album. I kind of found myself thinking, yeah, this is a good album, I like it, but I don't love it. I don't love it like the way I love Omni. I don't love it the way I love Judgment Day. Like, it doesn't feel like it's at that level, but it's still a well put together album, a well paced album. It's a well constructed album. Like, it's solid, and for solid albums I give a 7.
I feel like that's so generous. I mean, you're totally entitled, and that's totally fine.
I was just not like, it felt like it was good, but I just didn't find that it was special. But I'm like, well, there's nothing like inherently wrong with a lot of these songs. It's just,
yeah. So I mean, I know what score I want to give the album, but I don't think it's really fair for some reason, because I'm trying to figure out a way to really justify it. So I think I'm just gonna do this thing where I split it down the middle and give it a 5, because I think I want to give it a lower score, but the thing is, lower than 5 to me means there's something wrong with the album. And there's really nothing wrong with this. This is more personal.
Yeah.
This is more taste. If I really want to say, oh, it's wrong that it sounds like Iron Maiden, or it's wrong that they have too many ballad-like, parts on this album, that's not really fair. So it's not really fair to give it anything lower than a 5, I think. Even though I wanted to. I don't think it's worth even a 5. I would probably give this a 4 or even a 4.5. Feels like a comfortable score for me. But because that's more my just personal opinion attacking it, I think a 5 is more of a fair score. I think this band is capable of a lot more creatively. I think they're capable of a lot more just in their writing and their presentation and all that stuff. I guess that all falls under creativity anyway. So they're just capable of more. They've done better. I've heard better from them. Not even Omni, but their previous work as well. I think this is one of their weakest albums, to be honest, and that's a shame, because we like this band. So 7 from TV Fish and a 5 from me.
Anyway, guys, that's all we got for you today. Remember to like this video if you liked it. Tell us in the comments below, what are your highlights from this album? Where does it stack up against the other Angra albums? We know you guys love Temple of Shadows, but other than that album, where does this rank up in the grand scheme of the band's discography? We'd love to hear what you guys have to say, and subscribe if you guys are new to the channel. I'm TV Fish.
How about yourself?
And keep the horns up.